There's no sugarcoating it. Marvel Snap's newest card, Zombie Galacti, it's not good. There are a bunch of reasons that this card does not end up succeeding, so let's go through each of them in order because they're basically all of the text and numbers on the card. Let's start with 7. Zombie Galacti costs 7. This is a cool thematic element of a card being sort of out of reach in a normal game, but in practice, it tends to make the card wildly unplayable because that cost is so easily disrupted. Now, there are good ways to get extra energy. Luna Snow, Wiccan, Hope Summers, and Merlin are fairly commonly seen when you're playing Zombie Galacti. But ultimately, what it does is it adds another hoop to a card that already has plenty of hoops to jump through. Why does it have these hoops to jump through? That's because of the text that it has. It chooses 6 cards at random at the beginning of the game in your deck and transforms them when played into copies of Zombie Galacti, which means that the other part of the thing you have to do in deck building for this card is buff it. Cards like Shuri, Gwenpool, Galacta, you can kind of see the shape of the deck taking place. However, this has to happen at the same time as you are buffing your own energy access. And if you're not doing this, or if it's not in hand, what are you doing all of this for? Speaking of for, that is the other bad thing about Zombie Galacti. If this card said, I don't know, 12, then suddenly ramping into it and transforming all of your stuff into giant guys is a lot more plausible just on baseline. But as is, the reason this card is bad is because it's asking too much of you for a payoff that is too small. Now, the premise I want to take with this video is that that's actually a good thing. I don't mean for this card, which I think is a fairly obvious skip if you're interested in winning games of Marvel Snap. I mean for the balance of Marvel Snap as a whole. If this card were good, I think it would have a relatively deleterious and negative impact on the metagame. Imagine a world where this said, say, 6-8, and your opponent was just, with one Shuri, able to transform their entire board into 16-power Zombie Galacti. You would be pretty upset about that card existing because there's no meaningful counterplay to it beyond things like Cosmo and Alioth, which any deck would be able to build for priority to avoid. This, I think, is a case of them identifying a potentially negative play pattern and nerfing it into oblivion before it was released. The question then becomes, what's the point of making the card if it's just going to be fairly mediocre, and is there anywhere they can go that puts this card into a reasonable place where you can actually play it and not feel bad about it without making it too strong? I think there are a couple of other things that need to be discussed with this card before we jump into the decks that play this card, though, because they are important. The first is that for some reason, when you copy the on reveal, it doesn't work. You can't Iron Lad this card. You can't Symbiote Spider-Man this card. There should be ways that make sense to actually cheat this kind of effect out, like many other expensive on reveals, but they just don't seem to work with how the game engine is set up or with the specific wording of the text of this card. You would think that it transforms them into copies of this, for example, but the cards are flagged by Zombie Galacti, so when you Iron Lad something, it doesn't actually have any targets for the Zombie Galacti ability because those cards are being targeted by Zombie Galacti and not Iron Lad. That seems to be the baseline engine thing here going on. And again, I'm not saying that would be a bad thing. I'm not saying it would be a good thing if that did work, but it's important to understand that it doesn't when we talk about the decks that actually work here. So outside of everything I've said, it's too expensive, it doesn't pay you off enough, the 2 quests it asks you to go on are buff me and also have extra energy, and there are usually a lot better payoffs for doing something like that. All of that said, there is one piece of utility to Zombie Galacti, and it is throwing it in your deck and getting your opponent to snap on you. I played only a few games of this card before I realized how bad it was. But the wins I got were 8 cubers where my opponent snapped. They were like, I'm going to beat this idiot playing Zombie Galacti. And then I didn't play Zombie Galacti. So with all of that said, let's jump into some decks. One of the interesting things about Zombie Galacti is that you'd think that it's the kind of thing that's asking you to do a bunch of weird stuff, like play a Magic, play a Wong, play a Shuri on the Wong, transform all of that stuff. But those decks don't actually get enough things on the board. I talked about the 2 quests of buff Zombie Galacti and also have the energy to play Zombie Galacti, but there's a 3rd quest, which is have enough stuff on the board that's tagged by Zombie Galacti to actually make it worth doing. And it's really the interplay of those things that make this so awkward. One of the really interesting things that I noticed, though, was that this is a card that actually has a lot of enablers in what you might call the good stuff sector of the metagame. Merlin can get you up to 8 energy on the final turn of the game, allowing you to play a Demon from the Hood and Zombie Galacti. You can use Luna Snow to get up to Zombie Galacti range. You can use Hope Summers to get up to Zombie Galacti range. We'll talk about Wiccan in a second, but that's another sort of generic good cards pile card. And I think it's actually quite interesting to take note of that. When you look at this card, the combo-y ways of doing it just end up being sort of worse than, say, playing Wong Magic and then other Wong cards. You're going to get more out of doing Magic Wong, White Tiger, Sage, Taskmaster than you are out of doing Zombie Galacti on your Wong. And that's, you know, a very reasonable thing to have happen, but it also sort of indicates that those kind of builds are just a dead end. What I was struck by was just how many good cards there are that add energy. And I think that this card is actually like it's easy to look at this card and be like, this is unplayable and it'll always be unplayable, but I don't know how far off it actually is. Like, the more I look at, like, okay, this is a theoretical combo endgame that gets slapped on top of a good cards deck, the stronger it gets, the more worrying it gets. Because a deck like this isn't supposed to have access to Hela. Like, you should not be playing a deck like this and then also have Hela in your deck. That's kind of what it would be like if this card were good. Now, luckily for us, this card is not good, so you don't have to worry about that right now. But there is just kind of a lot of good things going on here that you incidentally would get to slap a good version of this card on. And when we talk about a good version of this card, I'm talking like, if this was a 7/7, we'd be having some serious conversations about this deck. If this was a 6/5 or 6, I think we'd be having some serious conversations about this deck. I am kind of legitimately worried at this card being weak, allowing them to buff it to be stronger, and then it actually becoming a serious problem. That is why I said in the title of this video that I think it's a good thing that this card is bad, because there's just not really built-in interaction for it if you fix some of its problems. It just does what it's going to do, and it does happen. And the only thing that's making it bad right now is that what it's doing isn't that good. But if it started doing stuff that was actually good, and we're talking like just a numbers change off, to be honest with you, drop it down to 6, raise the power up to 7, this card is absolutely busted in half, right? Like, that's a pretty big numbers change, but it doesn't sound that impossible to me. And I would be worried about that if it happened. The Wiccan stuff is a great similar thing going on here. This is a list from Jay Walla, and it is very similarly constructed, right? Like, you see what's going on here. There's a bunch of just really good cards that happen to give you the energy to play this. We have Merlin, we have potential discounts from Surge, we have a Rhino to give us extra fodder for Merlin, we have Luna Snow, we have Wiccan, we have all of this stuff. So we're playing like a normal group of good cards. We get buffs out of Gwenpool and Shuri, and you can actually do stuff with this list. Like, there is, in as much as there are playable versions of this card, playable decks with this card, they look like this, which is really, really interesting to me, because you'd expect them to look like weird, Hela-y, Wong-y combo decks. They don't look like that at all. They look like decks that are trying to be able to free roll this card, which is part of what makes it so fraught that this card is so bad, because these are the decks that are going to get the benefit from it. It's not going to be some kind of weird, wacky combo deck. It's going to be Wiccan playing a thing that turns half of its cards into the Hulk. That's the sort of nightmare scenario for this. So my contention is that it is probably correct for them to balance this card the way that they did. If they want to give it a couple of points more, I think that's probably within bounds. But if they want to actually legitimately like do something drastic to make this card stronger, they are going to be risking some seriously problematic stuff. I genuinely believe that. These decks are good outside of the part where Zombie Galacti is in them because his payoff isn't enough. If his payoff was satisfactory, I worry that these decks might be too good and very not fun to play against. If you want to see some weirdo Wong stuff, this is the splat version of Zombie Galacti. It is playing what you might reasonably describe as the two saddest anti-synergy with Zombie Galacti cards, Iron Lad and Symbiote Spider-Man. It's not great to try to Zombie Galacti though, so let's just get that out of there. It does not work because of the way targeting works. I can't exactly explain it, but my best guess is that Zombie Galacti tags the cards as copies of Zombie Galacti, and so when it is copied by Iron Lad, it's like, okay, well, you're not Zombie Galacti. When it is merged into Symbiote Spider-Man, it looks at Symbiote Spider-Man and goes, you're not Zombie Galacti. I think that's what's going on there. I can't be exactly sure. The other thing that happens is it will work, I believe, if somehow Zombie Galacti is on the board without its on reveal having gone off, you can Symbiote Spider-Man them, which suggests that it actually refers to the thing being a one-shot thing. So the tag gets used up when you play Zombie Galacti, and then you can't Symbiote Spider-Man to transform them again. Weird, but if you are somehow able to Iron Fist Cosmo your Zombie Galacti and then activate your Symbiote Spider-Man because you have approximately 8 turns to do this, you can make it happen. You shouldn't. It's not worth doing, but you can make it happen. This is a deck that is extremely, extremely, extremely medium. I strongly suspect that you would be better off using pretty much any other payoff for your Wong Magic deck than this. But again, one of the things that sticks out is like, it's not as hard as you think to get extra stuff off of this. It just isn't. There is just a lot of easy ways to be like, oh yeah, no, I just have 7 energy. And this is using 2 of the worst ways, Jennifer Kale and Magic, but it's still pretty easy, relatively speaking. I was surprised by this because you look at a 7 and you're like, okay, that's unplayable. But it's not. Khonshu Galacti was kind of the only thing I could see making sense for how this deck ended up looking. And I think it's like not bad, but I'm not really convinced that it's making the deck better in a meaningful way. Like this is, it's not ass. Like it's far from ass. I played against Jimmy Dickens when he was playing something similar to this. The output was like pretty real-ish. In a different world, this could be a legitimate thing that you would actually want to do. I don't think we live in the world where this is a legitimate thing where that you actually want to do, in large part because like it requires giving up on really cool scalers like Morbius, because you don't want to transform the Morbius. You feel really stupid when Galacti tags that. But generally speaking, the idea here is get your Zombie Galacti into the discard pile. Most of the rest of your cards don't enter the discard pile. Cards like Scorn, X-23, Proxima Midnight, they're not going to be in the discard pile. They're going to be on the board in your hand, a la Apocalypse. You have enough cards in here that you are able to put that into a real situation, and you have Corvus Glaive if you ever actually want to try to get extra energy ramp into an actual card. This is a deck that also gets to play probably the best backup plan of any of the sort of all-in decks that play Zombie Galacti in them, because it is just normal discard. You get to play a normal discard deck, and it is a functional deck because of that. The Zombie Galacti probably making it a little bit less functional. So, Zombie Galacti is not great. It's not a card that you want to go out there and get if you want to win a bunch of games of Marvel Snap right now. Hardly worth the trouble. It's a very interesting card. It's a card that I am scared of what its potential could be. I would be worried about them over buffing it, because I do think that if this kind of effect is good, it's very, very good. This is the kind of card where it's either going to be kind of unplayable garbage or extremely, extremely strong. I'm not sure I see a good balance state for a card like this. I think it's worth talking about them taking this as a swing on something that looks cool and is cool. The animation is awesome, but I think a lot of people are going to look at this and say, it's bad, they should make it better. And I kind of wanted the thrust of this video to be like, be careful what you wish for, because I think if this card is strong, it is strong in a deeply unfun, deeply unpleasant, very hard to interact with way. I'm not saying it needs to be as weak as it is right now, but I am saying that a lot of people are talking about very aggressive buffs for this card, and I don't think they fully thought out what a world where this card is good actually looks like. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I am sweating a ton right now. Like, this was just basically, most of my videos are one take. This was like a really one take video where I was just talking and talking and talking. And I want to title it like an increasingly sweaty rant about Zombie Galacti, or like Zombie Galacti, be careful what you wish for. We'll see what we end up titling it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I've been KMBest. I'm very, very sweaty. You've been phenomenal. Hopefully not nearly as sweaty. And I will see you in the next one.